Skye. It is an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Um, so, folks know sort of how this conversation came about. I took a trip sitting course on double blind that you were one of the instructors on, and I was really impressed with the approach and the content, and I ended up being able to leverage that in a very positive way in my life. And I said, this seems like a fascinating individual. Hopefully, we can have a chat. And so here we are.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out. It was really sweet to get your email.
So maybe the appropriate way to start a conversation like this might be just a little bit of your background, your history. How did you come to be a teacher, a facilitator, an integrator? Because I don't think those are the types of things that they typically put on the list when you talk to your guidance counselor in high school. So be
Yeah,
fascinated
no.
to know, like your background.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm also like the daughter of an ordained minister and a kindergarten teacher, so it's not like never never would have thought this was the place that I would be right now. I was going to say the place that I would end up, but who knows where I'll end up.
That's
So,
right.
place that I am right now. So yeah, I grew up. Um, my dad was like working on his PhD, and in the living room of our tiny little two-bedroom apartment, and the only way to get his attention was to perform or say something cute or clever. And so I made a living at that and became an actress. And I did that for a while, and I have my MFA in acting from Harvard.
Oh wow.
Um, and when I came out to LA to pursue an acting career, I thought I was going to end up in New York and do the theater thing, but I couldn't handle the winters anymore. 2 years in Boston was like plenty. I'm from Florida, so I thought seasonal depression was a myth. So yeah, the reality of like living in the Northeast was challenging for me. So I came out to sunny Southern California, and about a year after I came out here, um, well, let me rewind. Maybe about 6 months after I came out here, I had one of those like throw your hands up in complete surrender experiences.
Hmm.
Um, when I was in grad school, I had one of those experiences like you described in your first episode, where um, I felt energy for the first time.
Hmm.
I was in an Alexander technique class, and I like cracked my back and sat up, and the whole world was upside down, and I was gonna pass out if I didn't breathe. And when I did, like um little pixels started flipping over, like I was playing memory, one at a time, flipping over until I could kind of like, oh wait, no, this is the world. That's right. Oh, breathing, breathing, right? So I had this like awakening, this strange experience, and went and spent the rest of the afternoon like pacing and toning, like using my voice and humming. Someone who didn't have some sort of way to kind of normalize that experience might have thought I'd had like a psychotic break. Um, because I was like emotional, I was crying, I was like, what is going on? Something's been freed up, something's been released. And um, and so I felt really connected with Alexander technique and with the yoga classes that we were taking there. Um, and then once I moved out to LA, about 6 months after I was out there, I started to realize that a lot of my life um, in LA was the same as what some of my life in Boston had been, and what some of my life in the San Francisco Bay Area had been, and what my life in Florida had been. And I'd like crisscrossed the country, 3 times, breaking up with my life, choosing something different, and reinventing myself. And I was like, holy cow. Can we curse on
Oh
the
yeah.
podcast? I was like, holy shit, like the only common denominator here is me, and
That's
I
a powerful
literally,
realization.
yeah, I was like, okay, this is like something's going on here, and the only common denominator is me. So I threw my hands up and I was like, okay, universe, or like whatever you call you. I had like this like sassy little attitude like I do. And I was like, okay, I get it. Like, it's me. It's something I'm doing. I get it. Like, I'm ready. I don't know what that means, but I'm ready. And a couple weeks later, I think, a friend of mine gave me a copy of The Secret. I started a gratitude practice. And I think The Secret is a little incomplete. Like, it's a good starting point, right? But I don't just like imagine it and it comes true. It's magical thinking, right? But it's a good place to start. Like, we begin to vision, we start to feel into it, and then we can take aligned action. That's the part that sometimes is left out. Take aligned action, and then the trust and surrender into the process. That becomes the engagement with the creative flow, the reality, the process of trusting and engaging, right? It's like this fine line.
Manifesting isn't just a dream.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some doing required.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me too, it's like a cornerstone of my work is what is the engagement between the doing and the being, and that contemplative space, between meditation or thinking and figuring something out. There's this like contemplative space. They talk about it in the Gene Keys. This is like the space that you kind of hold of like, oh, what's the information coming in? How does that inform my system? How do I move forward with that? How does it inspire me so I can take aligned action towards something? And then once I take that action, how do I rest and celebrate and give myself some downtime to be able to be inspired again so I can take aligned action, celebrate, rest, right? It's like this beautiful circle.
Yeah, there's a lot of yin yang, masculine feminine imbalance happening in the United States in particular. It's interesting because I work with a lot of international folks. Like, my company's largely headquartered in Germany, and they've got like 1 to 2 years of maternity leave, for instance, just as an example of how like differently aligned we are culturally. And here we've become so obsessed with the notion of quote unquote success, and there's a trillion things wrong with that. But even if you thought success was raising your vibration and achieving enlightenment and whatever, if you came to it with the same approach that we come to earning money and achieving titles, it's like you're missing half the game.
Right, like the grind culture.
Right, it's like you've got to
in the spiritual world.
The rest between the beats to have music. You can't just have a gong crash all day, or it's a mess. Sorry, I interrupted your flow. We're talking about
no, it's okay.
How you to this endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, and from there, I read The Secret. I took on this practice. I went through a dark night of the soul. I was in the process of getting divorced. I got sick. I was like allergic to LA when I moved there for 9 months. So like I couldn't breathe.
Can you unpack Dark Night of the Soul for folks who aren't familiar with that term?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, you can do a whole podcast on that. Dark Night of the Soul. It's like you're rock bottom. It's that moment where all you can do is throw your hands up and say, I surrender. And it took, the repetition of the universe being like, hello, 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 do you see? It's the same thing. Do you see? Oh, you don't see yet? Okay, let me show you again. Let me show you again. Oh, you don't get it yet? How about now? Oh, how about an accident? Oh, how about a sickness? Oh, how about and it was like any way that the universe could kind of be like, hello, wake up. And I feel like I finally heard. It was like that aha moment for me. Dark Night of the Soul. Mine was grad school. It was a great program. They give great training, but there was no container. I now know through the work that I do what a sloppy container looks like, and I've done my fair share of cleaning up a lot of those as an integration specialist, which is actually why I moved into facilitation, so I didn't have to clean up other people's sloppy containers. But yeah, so Dark Night of the Soul, I didn't know who I was, my codependency, my marriage, my indiscretions, because I didn't realize at that time that I was actually polyamorous. And so, like, understanding different ways of being, modalities of living and of loving. I'm a part of the LGBTQ community. These orientations and these identities were pretty foreign to me. That felt right, but having, like, I didn't have anybody modeling that way of being for me. And so I was, fumbling my way through it blind, and made a mess of my life in the ways I guess I needed to be able to learn the lessons and get the message. And grad school, Dark Night of the Soul, was also the first place that I heard, like, the language of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Like things like live by choice, not by habit. Like, what does that mean? And when you're talking about a character, you're choosing a character's actions and thoughts and background, right? And so really working in theater we call, like, outside in or inside out on how you're creating your character. Do we start with, like, the body and the or do we start with, like, the emotional inside part? And so grad school kind of gave me this new language that then, once I moved to LA, had this, like, epiphany and started doing the work, as we
You
call it.
doing any traditional therapeutic work with any
No,
counselors or anything?
no, just, grad school is the process, like, oh, show us your audition scene. Great. It was good enough to get you in, but now we're going to dissect you. We're going to pick you apart. We're going to pull you apart. And then we're going to teach you skills, and then you're supposed to put yourself back together. And then we're going to ship you off to Russia for 3 months, because my MFA is from the Moscow Art Theater. So they
Ah,
came over and taught us, and then we went over there and trained. And it,
that must have been culturally very interesting.
it was, and it was also very, yeah, culturally and relationally, it barren for me, like relationally barren. Safe containers, deep relating,
The hyper
trust,
masculine country.
trust and safety. The country, but really the some really beautiful people within my program, my community. But we also had some toxic people in there that really became disruptive, and I was, like, involved in that, and the whole thing, like, erupted in Moscow on, a dark and a
Stormy night.
snowy night. Yeah, with people, like, running around outside without their shoes on. It was just, yeah,
Oh wow.
just like what can happen when on when containers don't exist, and and there and trauma is triggered, and nobody feels safe. So there was a lot of rupture, right, in that community, and I feel like that's been a part of my work too, is, like, rupture and repair within community. And again, like, I needed to go through this. This led me to, maybe I shouldn't be married. Maybe I need to be single. Maybe and really led me to coming to LA,
Were
having
you
this
aware of your
epiphany.
orientation before that?
I liked
You were married
men.
to a female male.
I was married to a male. I knew I liked men and women, and was discovering, what the gender spectrum looked like as well. But married to a very like traditional Indian man,
Oh, wow.
where like nobody in his family had ever been divorced. That sort of thing.
Arranged marriages kind of stuff.
Yeah, his grandmother was arranged. But we had fireworks. We loved to play, and had really, really beautiful reasons to get married. But like, what can come up in that? And he also didn't come to grad school with me. I went by myself,
Mm.
and he stayed back in California. And
It's a
the
lot.
long distance marriage after a year of being married, it just, yeah, I couldn't. And being in Boston and living in winter for the first time, and nothing else was alive in my apartment except the little German cockroaches that came up through the drains, and then all of the relational rupture that was going on within our acting community. There are 9 men and 9 women. So it was very small, and just lots of rupture, and no ability or container or process for the school, or for the company, the 18 of us, to be able to repair in any way. And that was all the first year, and then I had to go back for the second year, and was actually told by the school, like, don't talk about this anymore. Yeah, it was like a whole thing. So,
Interesting.
so couldn't trust. I didn't have like a mentor or somebody who was there, helping me normalize my experience. So I just like focused on my studies, got close to 1 or 2 people, and just put my head down and finished the program. And I learned a lot. I got some great roles because of that. Build my resume. Went to LA instead of New York, and started the audition process in LA, doing the starving artist thing. But again, relationally with, you know, people that I was sleeping with, or partying with, or friends with. There was just like, I feel like I had been looking, like searching for integrity my whole life. And it wasn't until I met this wonderful woman, actually. We joked that we met in a threesome, because we did. And she modeled consciousness for me for the first time. And I was like, I'll have what she's having. Like, whatever that is, I want more of this. And so she and I started.
Did you know what you were seeing?
I didn't know what I was seeing, but I know what I was seeing was what I wanted.
Gotcha.
So I couldn't identify it, but I was like, this woman is modeling a way of being that my soul is like, oh, fuck yeah, to.
And what did that look like? Calm, attentive, loving?
Yes. And like, she was starting a cleanse in a couple of weeks. She was in yoga teacher training to become a yoga teacher. She was a massage therapist. She had this joy that is exuded from her. She had been to Burning Man, like, she was going in a couple of months, actually. It was like, come with me. It was like, I can't afford it. And then guess what? I couldn't afford it, and I didn't go. And she actually fell in love with somebody else on the playa that year.
Oh,
But I got to be in their wedding the next year, so I
that's
made
cool.
it happen. I was like, I'll come. So my first year was a nice reparative experience to be able to take the dissolving of and a girlfriend relationship, and to be able to transmute that into something actually deeper and more, because of.
Do you see it as because there's 2 ways, well, there's infinite ways, but there's kind of 2 primary ways I think people would look at that experience. The traditional American romanticized way would be, or storytelling way would be, oh, I lost this woman who was, my dream and was pulling me into the light and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And then the other way of looking at it is, She showed up exactly when I needed her, and she unlocked exactly what she needed to, and then she went off and did exactly what she needed to.
Hmm. And yet I saw her a month ago. This was like 13 years ago when this happened. And I saw her a month ago, and like she's married to that woman now. And she actually, in the 4 months that we dated, she changed my life. And I actually call her my compass. We still relate, and we still love each other very much. And she actually took me to a potluck in LA, and introduced me to a community that became my spiritual community for the next decade.
Wow.
And
So prior to
that's
all this, speaking of spirituality,
mhm.
I know you mentioned a little bit about your parents. What was your spiritual substrate going into the experiences that you had at Harvard? Like, did you believe in God? Did you believe anything mystical? Like, where was your head, heart, and soul at?
Mm-hmm. I don't think I was spiritual. I don't think I had exposure to spirituality. I had exposure to religion, which is
Yeah.
different. Hmm. Structures that agreement realities that people say, yes, I believe that too, and then it gives them some semblance of trust and
Community.
safety and community and reality, like an agreed reality of how the world works, and what's right and what's wrong. And I'm not saying that any of those beliefs are wrong or bad in any way. Just that for me, it was like lacking the spirit
Yeah,
within
some
it.
of it can become very shallow.
And most religions are based on somebody's direct experience with the divine that they then talk about. So the whole Bible is just stories of people who've had these experiences, and yet I hadn't had a direct experience, a
Hmm.
felt sense, a transcendent experience, an ego death, emerging with the all. I hadn't had any of those experiences. And it was really through this through line of finding this community that um, um, my girlfriend at the time and I went to an MDMA ceremony. And I was like, I mean, I know MDMA, like I've taken Molly before, but what do you mean by ceremony? Like, what does that look like? Um, and so,
What did that look
it looked like, I think there were probably 10 or 12 of us. This person who was running it, organizing it, lived in community. I was like, what do you mean you live in community? And so, there's like a big courtyard and like 4 little houses around this courtyard. Um, and we set an intention, and we opened up a container, and we had a sacred fire, and we howled at the moon and took our medicine. There were like beautiful confessions of that some people have had, and music, like it's a really beautiful like musical community, medicine music community. And from meeting that community, actually the next morning I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I found them. I was like, I knew they existed. I knew I wasn't the only one. I couldn't be the only one. I found them. We howled at the moon. We did all these things. I didn't tell her that we took MDMA, but I was like, we did all these other things. We meditated all night, these sorts of things. And she was like, oh, yeah, I went through that phase too. You'll get over it just like we did. And I said, you know what, Mom? No, this isn't a phase. This is a choice. And these people are special. And I didn't know what I meant by that, but I now know that means that these people were modeling a way of being that was calling to my soul. And the way that they related, the language they used, the personal accountability, the commitment to community, the modalities that they were interested in, whether it be music or yoga or plant medicine ceremonies. These people started sharing, oh, well, yeah, we're actually a part of a community, the Santo Daime. And I was like, the what? They were like, have you heard of ayahuasca? And I was like, oh yeah, who? And so they shared with me about this beautiful tradition from the jungles, and the Judeo-Christian amalgamation that was created when the Catholics came into the jungle and drank the brew and made a mashup religion of the indigenous, drinking of ayahuasca, the West African religious traditions of the Orishas, and some of their personifications of deities, and Catholicism. And I was searching. I'd had this throw my hands up moment, epiphany, and I was like, I'm ready. And it felt like this was the next step. And I was literally like, yeah, I'll have what she's having, because I went through an orientation and then sat in my first Daime work, December 2010. And that was the only time I sat in the Daime church. I actually started sitting in an independent group that kind of spun off of the Daime, with plant tea ceremonies, I think they were called in the beginning, and eventually found a name and a branding, and I eventually became like just really devoted to this community, a pillar of the community, and a guardian within the space, not facilitating but supporting the facilitation. And then that medicine started to inspire me to become more of me. I like to say that grad school was getting a master's in being other people, and my medicine work is getting a master's in being myself.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you do these days?
That's a good question. It looks different ways. I have been back working maybe about a year after about a year or two break for health reasons. So I've kind of reinvented my angle, or my approach, where I come from, the lens that I use when I talk about this work. For me, the medicine is a tool in a much bigger process of evolution, of consciousness, of self, of collective consciousness. And so for me, my work looks like I do one-on-one coaching work for people outside of medicine. In the Daime, they talk about the work between the works. So what happens outside of ceremony? So integration and just life. How do you life?
What does it
So,
mean for those who are uninitiated?
yeah, that's a little culty, but yeah. But yeah, I get that. Not saying you're saying it was a cult, but for those who, yeah, haven't
Who haven't had a psychedelic experience,
heard or had that
not know
experience yet.
what does that mean to integrate?
Yeah, to integrate, it's like, so when I run integration circles too. And so when I run them, I say, what is integration? Why are you guys here? What do you how do you define it? So I'm actually curious to hear how you define integration.
So I'm just going to speak from my own personal experience. I'll leave
Mm-hmm.
out the things that I've read and, talk to others, obviously, on podcasts like this. When you first tap into something mystical, whether it is with or without a plant medicine or something like LSD, which technically isn't a plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
it is so map exploding, meaning you live your whole life so convinced that everything you see and touch is real, and that the rules that have governed your behavior to date are so important and are the way in which you live. And your people's perception of you matters so much. Like there's just this construct that you live in that you are so certain is so real and important and whatever, because it's never been challenged in a way that is shattering. It might get moved around at the edges a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but when you have a truly mystical experience, no matter how it's generated, you come out of it like, what the fuck?
Yeah. By its nature, it's destabilizing. It
It's
changes
so
the paradigm.
destabilizing
Hmm.
because it's like, wait a second, I'm God? Wait, like I can merge with the universe? It's just like everything is suddenly exploding in your head. And depending on what you're doing and how long you're in that state, you start getting these like divine downloads where it's like Akasha or the Holy Spirit, or pick a name for it, just
Right. Whatever you call it.
plugs into your
Yeah.
third eye or some
Hmm.
chakra or whatever, and all of a sudden
Hmm.
you just know shit. And you're like,
Hmm.
how do I know this? And what does it
Yeah.
even mean to know it? And I can't put it into words, but I can feel it in my entire body that it's true.
And you're
And
remembering it. You're like remembering it again for the first time. You're like, wait, what?
it's well, that was a very destabilizing part for me when I had a heroic mushroom journey on my own. Is I was listening to it was an ayahuasca based playlist, and I felt in my entire being, I remember sitting there thinking, I'm so glad that I wrote this. And it was just like, what does that mean? And it's just like, you can't explain what a sensation of that is like when you suddenly feel like you are everything and you are
Mhm.
all time, and time loses meaning,
Right.
and suddenly
Yeah.
time isn't linear, and maybe infinity is real, and what does it mean to suddenly embody infinity? And so anyway, you come out of this myriad of experiences, and you're not going to have all of them every time, God willing,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
because the brain would explode. But you come back to earth, whatever this container is, and if you have no idea, like if nobody set you up for, so here's a series of things you could experience, and here's roughly what it means, and here's how you kind of, work your way back from that. I think it's very easy that people could go into psychosis because it's
Absolutely.
so radically different than
Disintegrated.
yes, exactly.
Right. Hmm.
Dismembered,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
To remember,
To
I don't remember.
remember.
I just heard this the other day. It's like the opposite of remember is not forget; it's dismember, and it's like our fracturing of our consciousness to the point where we forget that we are all one. To
Mm.
remember is like, oh, we're putting the pieces back together, that which we already know.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And so to me, integration is having either a guide, whether it's a book or a guru or a clan, a circle, somebody, something that can give you any semblance of grounding of like, okay, you're still here, you still matter, and let's try and piece together what the hell just happened
Hmm.
so that you don't
And
freak
and
out.
helping normalize, yeah, and helping normalize that experience for you, right?
Yeah.
It's like all of you is welcome here, and all of the things that you didn't even know are also welcome here, and we might discover more as we're working together. And that's why it's like so important that when you do pick somebody who's an integration specialist or coach in some way, that they are trauma informed,
Mm-hmm.
and that they are someone who can receive all of who you are and your identity, and they've been doing this kind of work, and they've worked with integration specialists as well, and it's somebody who's walked the path,
Yeah.
right?
And that
A
wasn't even,
spirit, a
I
spiritual
didn't even
Sherpa.
talk about yes, I love that. So I'm planning on starting a business, and it's going to be called Haney Healing Sherpa. So I'm really glad that you brought up that specific term, because like a Sherpa, no one can climb Mount Everest for you, right? It's your
No,
journey.
yeah,
That
right.
that
I'll
trauma,
walk it with you. I've
yeah,
been up there before.
I'll carry the heavy pack, right? Because sometimes you don't have the space to hold that opened container of trauma. So
Hmm.
I'll open my arms and I'll hold some of that load
Hmm.
for you
Hmm.
until you can
Hmm.
figure out what to do with it.
Yeah,
That's the piece
and
that
building skill sets and strength so that I'm not always holding that for you,
exactly.
right? Like I am teaching you how to fish in the process. It's a skill building process of, okay, I can carry this part of your pack, but you got to walk the mountain and you've got to carry your water, right? It's like
Yeah.
one of the 10 principles of Burning Man is radical self-reliance. You got to come prepared. You got to do your research. You got to know your dose. You got to come resourced, so you're not under resourced, so that when shit hits the fan,
When there's a
you
monsoon.
become that you become so dysregulated that you can't function anymore. And so when we talk about like walking the medicine path, it's the process of building skill sets and resiliency within these spaces. And so part of the work that I do is, of course, the one-on-one integration work, but I also work with cannabis as a psychedelic. Because I work above board, I'm working legally, and so the trip sitting skills that I teach come from the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness out of Boulder. I help with their trainings, and I'm part of the leadership team there as well. But these skill sets are what is it to be an ethical space holder? What does it look like to do your work? What does it look like for you to walk this path and to have these experiences and to be blown open and pieced back together each time, and practice integration and find community and normalize experience and come undone and be remade and disintegrate and reintegrate each time, because as a somatic practitioner housemate of mine said, like a resilient muscle is one that is strong and capable and facile, right? Like the ability for it to be to have the experience of the full range of capacity and capability,
Load
right?
under
Both,
multiple different angles.
yeah, both the surrender and the engagement, right? Both the extension, the extension and the flexion, right? Like that we're looking for the entirety, for the whole being, um, and not just like, well, this is the part, this is the part of reality. When people talk to me this way and relate to me this way, then I can be happy.
Right.
How do we build our resiliency and our literal language to be able to listen to ourselves, other planet and universe, and be able to engage with the process, engaging with the process of surrender, and back and forth
The piece that I think I
to
left out,
navigate.
like the integration story, is that the reason why you disintegrate yourself and have an ego death or something approximating it is not necessarily because it's fun to travel dimensions and see things from completely different perspectives, but we begin accruing trauma, assuming that you don't believe in infinite lives and rebirth and all that kind of stuff. Let's table that for, that's a maybe. I happen
Mm-hmm.
to believe it personally, but let's table that
Yeah,
because it's not
it's,
necessary to even go
possible,
to.
but not definitive. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
From the moment you're brought into this world, it's an unceremonious like entrance, no matter what.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter
To
if
be
it's
alive
Serenity
is to
Connection,
have trauma.
right? Like
Yeah.
you go
Yeah.
from being in this white noise, oxytocin pumping, like just it must be incredible to be a baby. Pure bliss
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, nothing interrupting you. You're just warm and just snuggled up, and everything is
Mm-hmm.
chemically perfect. And then all of a sudden, you are ejected and you are
Mm-hmm.
assaulted with all these sounds, all these sights. You have no
Mm-hmm.
map, no language. Everything is just pure
You're
chaos.
like, I have a body.
Exactly. So you cannot escape trauma. It might not be big T trauma, right? It might not be rape or someone you love getting murdered or you getting in a car accident, but you absolutely cannot avoid trauma as a human. 100% of us
Mm-hmm.
have it. And you start
Mm-hmm. And
accruing.
it's cumulative. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You accrue it from birth. And
Absolutely.
then because you
From
can't avoid
before birth, because you're
exactly
in your mom, you feel your mother's feelings,
right.
right? You're eating from her food. You can hear what's going on. You can see light
Yep.
inside the womb. right? And then if we want to go beyond that, the egg that was fertilized from my mother by my father's sperm was inside my mother when she was born,
Inside her
when
mother.
she was inside her mother. So I was literally inside my grandmother's womb at some point, the egg that I was
DNA
made from.
program trauma, basically.
Yeah, and epigenetics, right?
Yep.
And that's just like the physical tracking of like the egg I was made from. But think about attachment theory, right? Like that's how we pass trauma down relationally,
Yep.
is through how we relate with each other. And so anything that's learned in that too. And then we look at the epigenetics of it, of the bloodlines, but also if we do our work and we acknowledge the that any culture far enough back is indigenous, and that there are lost traditions, and that all of these medicines, most of these medicines, or at least the traditions that we hold them with, come from indigenous wisdom keepers. And so, naming and acknowledging, like, I am now sitting on occupied Kumeyaay land, now called San Diego, and that these keepers, this wisdom, has been here, and that if we look at, say, the very appropriated term aho is short for aho mitakiyasin, which means to all of my relations, which is not about bloodline. It's
Mm.
about bloodline, but it's about past lives. It's
Mm.
about every iteration. And then we get into what you were talking about, which is every life, in every time, in every iteration, in every star, in every being, in every particle that's ever existed from the moment that vibration first occurred
So
in the void.
I believe everything you're saying.
Yeah.
But again, even if we cut the pieces off that people might find a leap, you cannot avoid trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and to your other point about compounding trauma, it's like, okay, so now you've got trauma and you're storing it in your body energetically. And then when somebody hits you with something that you don't know how to deal with and you get triggered and you're
Mm-hmm.
now releasing that, you do or say something you don't mean to. And then the energetic response of the universe ultimately comes back and culminates more trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
we basically go on this lifelong journey of trauma accumulation. And I think that's eventually what happens with midlife crises, is that we basically run out of storage space, and people
Mm-hmm.
either end up on a path to death and destruction, whether it's from drinking themselves to death or diabetes from overeating or gambling addictions, or like whatever the thing is, there becomes some extreme pathology to deal with the fact that they're covered head to toe in trauma energy.
Mm-hmm.
Or you go into these dismembering experiences and disintegrating experiences where all of that storage of basically fake bullshit, because none of it is really you, but it feels like you. They're the stories you've carried around your whole life about what you like and don't
Because
like.
you've had that experience,
Exactly.
right? Like I lived that. I had that experience.
I'm
And then
afraid
we
of.
do, yeah, and then we do everything we can to avoid touching the hot stove again,
Right.
to avoid being hurt again.
And so I think the as far as I can tell so far on my journey with this stuff, and through all the clinical trials and the things that are really starting to heal people, is that by disintegrating yourself, having an ego death, whatever you want to call it, there becomes this clear separation between your consciousness, your body, your emotions. And you can suddenly see, oh, I'm not that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to carry that around with me forever.
I'm
I can,
not my story. I'm not
right,
my history.
I can let go of this thing that somebody said to me in sixth grade that has been
Mm-hmm.
weighing me down and causing me to avoid all of these people and circumstances and opportunities. And I
Mm-hmm.
can literally just cry, feel the feeling I was too hurt or afraid to feel at the time, and it whispers
Mm-hmm.
itself into the wind, and never to be a problem again.
And we call that reconsolidation of memory.
Mm.
And in the somatic therapy that I've studied, I'm not a therapist, but I've trained at the Hakomi Institute. I've trained in somatic psychedelic therapy work through Center for Medicinal Mindfulness. And what we say trauma is it's like a it's an experience, right? It's like a wave that's moving, and some systems the wave can move and complete through, and in other systems that sequence, as we call it, that sequencing of our ability to process it through our body and release it, um, in a system that's young or just doesn't have the skill sets or is under resourced at the moment, or is just so rigid that it just can't, that sequencing gets stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a somatic practitioner, I'm really back to what does my work look like, right? There's like so many different little pieces. But through the somatic work, and the reason I love working with cannabis, because it's a very somatic psychedelic,
Mm.
very body centered medicine. Like you can feel the energy in your body. When we start to turn inward and listen and look and feel, when we dare to feel and begin to build resiliency in daring to feel good. That's like a whole skill set too. But when we can sit with the discomfort, we start to go, oh gosh, like, oh my God, that's just so uncomfortable. Oh, it's like, well, where do you feel that? It's like,
Mm.
oh, it's in my heart. Oh, it's so mucky. Ew. It's like, oh, you have this like response that's coming through. What if you just like allow yourself the experience? Like I see a hand motion or a gesture or a sound that's coming through. Like give yourself a moment, like follow that through. And a lot of the time it's an incomplete sequencing. It's the completion of something that the body needed, that the soul needed, that the psyche needed in a moment that it just wasn't capable of in that moment. So the fact that we have trauma or that we hold on to things, it's not our fault. It's just what our capacity and capability was at the time. And so our work in the world, like why are we here? For me, is to take the opportunity and the wisdom and the knowledge and the time that we do have to be able to um, identify, sit with, be with, and complete these trapped sequences that are stuck in our body. Because if we don't, they need to go somewhere. So we take them out on somebody else because
Mm-hmm.
it's uncomfortable for me to hold this. So I'm going to make you feel this way. So at least I see it outside of me. It looks like it's outside of me, right? I'm trying to
Or if you
move that
have a
wave.
potentially strong internal container, I call it putting up the walls, right? If you've got
Mm-hmm,
heart walls that are so thick that they're just impermeable, I think that's what
mm-hmm,
causes a lot of these autoimmune conditions that we see now, is that
mm-hmm.
our body starts to attack itself
Yeah,
because the to your point, the wave pattern or whatever it is, it can't complete. And it's
the
almost like,
vibration,
yeah, it's like it's
right?
literally like shaking the cells to a point where it creates inflammation, and
Yeah.
then it's like a
Yeah. Yeah, and I see that happening in the cannabis work a lot, in psychedelic work, in other therapeutic, somatic therapeutic work. And you talked about this in your first episode of this podcast, the somatic, like the experience of the release that
mm,
happens, and like the body starts to like move and shake on its own. It's it's a process that the body is literally shaking out the trauma,
right.
right? Like when a gazelle gets chased by a leopard, I think they live in the same ecosystems, but when I might be mixing my animals, but when a prey is chased by a predator, if they are not captured, well, let's say if they are captured, like let's look at these people who are trapped in these very traumatic homes as children. If they're captured, there's something inside the system that actually allows them to dissociate so they don't feel the experience of being eaten,
Mm-hmm.
right? So those of us who were trapped in a home experience with continual little t traumas of, the build up of experience of what life is, who I am and who everybody else is because of it. The dissociation that's necessary in order to survive something that you can't escape.
Mm-hmm.
And then for those that do escape, the gazelle or the prey, whatever it is, one will often be surrounded by their community. Right, they'll find their community again, or they'll find a place near the community so they can feel safe, and they will literally sit there and shake all of the adrenaline, all of the trauma out of their body, because you don't really see trauma in nature unless we're burning the rainforests and the poor orangutans, that sort of thing. But you don't see like relational trauma. Hedgehogs don't like hold grudges against each other.
Right.
Right? They're just surviving. They're just being, and that's what's so beautiful about babies and animals, is that all they can do is be. Right? They model being for us. And it's beautiful, and it helps us to co-regulate, right? Like when I see something or someone just being, when I'm in nature, when I'm with a baby, when I'm with an animal, the beingness, their nervous system reminds my nervous system what it feels like to be regulated.
It's really
and
interesting.
then I co-regulate.
Premise
Mm-hmm.
is, I think you're describing flow state.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in flow state, you're not thinking about anything. There's no calculations. You're just doing the next divine thing that needs to be done instant after instant after instant.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Yeah,
feel
you
it.
hear something. It's like a listening,
Yeah, it's
right? And
listening, but like from
engaging.
your gut, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're plugged into the source, and you can feel it when you're dancing or playing music or
Mm-hmm.
making love or creating a creative work, whether it's art or whatever. And you just get lost, and all time, just kind of flows away, and you're just perpetually in the now.
And you're all of a sudden you're like, shit, it's 8 p.m. Where'd the day? What?
Right. And what I
I
think's
haven't
really
gotten up from my desk.
exactly, and what I think's really interesting about that premise is, if you really take a look at what's happening, you are in perfect surrender. You have given up control because you're not making, if you remember how I started it, you're not making any choices. The brain, the mental part of the mind that makes the left hemisphere of the brain, that's all calculations and predictions and blah, 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 that gets shut off. You are in pure being. You're just being. And if you think about what nirvana or heaven, whatever these, perfect states are, it's when you have completely surrendered to the flow of the universe. And I think why that is so hard, as I've investigated this over the last few years, is because it's terrifying. Because that is basically like the ultimate ego death is, I don't choose anything anymore. My preferences and wants and not wants are discarded. I am plugged into the universe, and I'm here to be of service. And whatever the universe calls from me, one instant to the next, I'm like floating down the river, and it's almost like watching a movie, but you're dancing in it. It's like an all senses dance forever. And I think it's really, really, really challenging to go from, especially in the West, where we have this like death grip on what it means to be a person and what it means to be important and successful and blah, blah, blah.
Contributing member of society.
Right. And now
A good
suddenly,
Christian.
that's right. And now suddenly it's like, wait, my path to heaven is to let go of everything and surrender all of my choice and just show up and be of service. Like, it's so antithetical. It's a
Yeah.
huge leap.
Because people think that holding on to identity and history is giving them some semblance of control. And I think that's the thing that's why I didn't do psychedelics when I was younger, because I didn't want to give up control. I
Right.
was terrified of losing control. And
I know a lot
eventually
of people who still
yeah,
feel that way.
eventually I was like, well, what does that look like? I was like, worst case scenario, like psychosis for the rest of my life. I did XYZ, I lost my fucking mind, and I couldn't get it back. I couldn't come back.
Not nothing.
It's not nothing, right? And even as I walk my path, as I go towards, more extreme projects, like being a part of the DMTX project through medicinal mindfulness, we're doing an extended state DMT project.
Is that on the intravenous DMT? Oh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
oh.
Oh boy, we can do a whole podcast about that. Yeah, but like moving towards that, like I had my people that I said I'm moving towards this experience. When I have this experience, can you please be an anchor for me? Right. And I call that like your spiritual safety net. This is part of integration. Isn't just what you do after the medicine, like work with somebody before you take your medicine so that they can teach you how to create your spiritual safety net and know your dose and what is your set and setting and intentions and what does a space look like, so that you are prepared, right? Because it is a skill, like being a carpenter. Being a psychonaut is a skill set, and it's an accumulation of multiple skill sets, and a lot of different things contribute to that. So for people who might not feel like they're ready, it's like, okay, maybe you don't do psychedelics, but maybe you take yoga and you meditate and you have a breath practice and you maybe try the float tank, right? Not my medicine, but other people's. I get dizzy in the tanks. Strange.
You know what's funny about like the whole preparation thing? It will never cease to amaze me the people who don't have the fear that you and I did. I literally just published an episode yesterday with a gentleman who was an Arctic Ranger, got deployed to Afghanistan. So he's been on a journey, right? Like
Yeah,
about like
out
closed
there.
heart and just like,
Ugh.
you know, don't worry about it. Just get out there and do the mission. Don't worry about feelings, blah, blah, blah. And he was in Miami and he just had this idea like, I'll do some mushrooms. Had never done them before, was on his own. He buys 6.5 grams of albino penis envy
No.
and just takes it all at once and just goes for a walk in the park. And as he's telling me the story, I'm thinking to myself, this could have gone so fucking badly. But instead, what happened was he ended up just sitting down in the light rain, and this beautiful soul came across the park and said, "How you doing?" And he's just crying, and he's just like, "We're all doing amazing." And he just had this beautiful connection. He's still friends with her to this day. And it was just so like, I almost felt bad that story was out because it can give such a false sense of like, just do an outrageous heroic dose on like a Thursday and just go for a walk in the park by yourself. Like,
Yeah, we say
can you?
start low and go slow. Like
Yes,
baby
this is
steps.
the
Like
way.
step your way into it. Yeah, this is the way.
This is the way. And in case anybody's not familiar, albino penis envy is basically the strongest strain that you could find.
Yeah, that's like taking 9, 10, 11, 12
It's
grams of mushrooms.
an outrageous amount to do. And a heroic dose is anywhere from 3.5 to 5 grams of quote unquote normal mushrooms. So to do that is really playing with fire. Now, you can have an unbelievably beautiful experience like this gentleman did. But the roll of the dice, the thing that could have happened, because he has a lot of trauma from his past, like the demons that could have shown up on that doorstep and found their way into his consciousness were many. So he was very lucky, and he's blessed. I'm happy for him that happened, but it's not
right. That's a good success story. And like,
and a
let's
caution,
educate. Yeah.
and
There's
a caution,
also
because there's so many different ways that could have gone. Have you seen people freaking out?
I have seen people with major somatic releases that had emotions attached to them and story attached to them. I have heard stories of people freaking out, usually in ayahuasca ceremonies.
Hmm.
Sometimes what it looks like to have to navigate that is that the, curandero or the person leading the facilitating the ceremony has to go and like help and navigate and basically do like an exorcism kind of experience if there's an entity or something present. And then what happens to the rest of the people in the circle, and so again, speaking to the importance of guardianship and co-facilitators in a space with big medicines like that, and the need for the skill sets, right? We had talked about before we got on this call. I told you that I had a, a, a traumatic experience the first time I did 5-MeO DMT, where the person was a friend of a friend, highly recommended, just do it, oh, it's a beautiful medicine, it's so beautiful. And I had like a full release, but what came out of me was like I was the volcano, and every feeling I never allowed myself to feel came out, and my body was moving, and he didn't know that that could happen, and so my body was injured in the process of
Oh,
all of this. And he didn't know we weren't in a place where I could vocalize. We were like in um a rental in Kona with like a family, families out at the pool, while I was primal screaming,
and for people
and
who don't know, 5-MeO DMT is arguably the strongest
mhm,
psychedelic there is.
mhm, mhm.
Short-lived, but talk about blowing
Yeah,
the container open.
yeah. They call it the God molecule for a reason. And that experience. And the first thing I remember my facilitator saying when I did come back into my body was no more screaming, right? Like
Ooh,
scolding, which
ooh.
is when you dissolve into the all and then you come back and you're scolded. And then about 30 minutes after I came back in my body, he hit on me, right? So like
Oh,
talk
gross.
about sloppy containers and just lack of integrity. Those kinds of experiences can and do happen. So again, another reason to do your research, get recommendations from people who've worked with people, like know your facilitator, ask them good questions. I've got a great document on my Linktree on my Instagram, from the Aware Project on safe sitting practices, questions to ask yourself, questions to ask your facilitator, and questions that your facilitator should be asking you, right? Like contraindications and history of mental health in your family and these sorts of things, medications.
You said that you
So,
injured yourself just to make it
mhm,
real for people because I have not done 5-MeO DMT myself, but I've watched a lot of ceremonies. And I've also had a lot of extreme somatic experiences on other
mhm,
medicines.
mhm.
Uh, I imagine you were thrashing. And so, what was the actual acute injury? Did you like hit your head? Did you smash your limbs into something?
There were a couple things. So, the facilitator said that I was like water, and my body was like water, and he was a black belt Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, and instead of him, I now know, having created a space where my body was free to express while my soul was on its journey, and so that my body would be safe, he had me on a tile floor on a little Berber area rug, leaning up against a couch. And I was like, just so you know, I tend to purge in ceremonies. So it's like, oh, well, all we have is a soup pot. So he just had like a big metal soup pot. So when I did purge and my body was moving, I scraped the bridge of my nose off on the edge of the soup pot, and also from the writhing on the the short rug and him trying to wrangle me. The whole side of my jaw was rug burned. Um, and I've had friends who like injured their ankle because they whacked it on something, or purging is part of it. So like those things need to be taken into consideration, and that's why like when I teach these trip sitting skills that introduce you to me, that I'm so insistent on like the integrity piece and the boundaries and what could happen and agreements and safe spaces, and making sure that the space is going to be safe for someone in an altered state. And also like the ethical part of all of this too. Again, like a cornerstone of how I approach my work. And let me tell you also that this experience that I had, as sloppily as it was held, and as sloppy as the container was, and he even said, don't try to talk about it or integrate. There is no integration, so don't even try. And I was like, pretty sure that's
the opposite.
incomplete, but we'll get back to that. Which is why I went into integration as the work that I do, right? It's like all of these experiences inspired or led me to who I am. And I actually was so blown away by the power of that medicine, that was the first medicine I learned how to facilitate. Was 5-MeO. And because 5 was so big and there was so much integration work needed and preparation work and the possibility of disintegration, because that's the point of that medicine, is to dissolve into a full release into the experience of merging with the all. I was like, who do I need to be in order to carry this medicine? And so I started training. I had one person who said, you want to facilitate this medicine? You do Hakomi. You want to learn more about integration? You study with the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness and do their psychedelic sitter school. And so I did. I went and I started getting my training so that I wouldn't cause any harm in the process of me being able to hold space for people to have these kinds of experiences. And through sitter school, that's where I was exposed. That's what we do, is we learn trip sitting and facilitation skills while using cannabis, which is legal and navigable. You've got a lot of choice and agency in it. And that medicine just called to me so much, and it was so much easier to integrate and navigate and prep for. And there was a whole container and methodology to it, and community built around it too. That I was just a fuck yeah to that container and to working with Daniel McQueen, and the ethical facilitating that we provide and teach there.
Have you had any experience with people having a radical increase in fear of death as a part of these experiences? The reason I ask is that for the last year, I have been suffering from a waxing and waning, but at times crippling fear of it, where when I was going on these journeys before and doing so fairly recklessly in some instances, the reason I think I was able to was that I just didn't have, like, I'd had my merging, transcendental experiences, and it was just like, okay, this is just the truth, and this is just is what it is, and it was just like I was just rolling with it. But it's almost like my attempt to kill my ego like trenched itself in and built a bunch of fortified, resolve.
Oh yeah.
And now the idea that I am God and things are infinite, not that I individually, like I'm the one, but like that we're all the one and we're just, right? And that this is one of infinite experiences that we will have over time, whatever. It's it hits me in waves, and it will literally send me into a panic attack, not even an
Mm,
anxiety attack, like
mm,
a crippling panic attack. Now, it's
mm,
not frequent anymore, because I'm a little over a year away from like, it was as I was detoxing off of THC, because I was heavily
yeah.
using it at the time. I was taking like a full bong rip every 2 hours from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. And I was having incredible growth spiritually,
Mm,
somatic releases like 5 days a week, like just incredible crying sessions and just so much healing. And but then, but then
and
I'm at the end of that road, and I cold turkey stopped everything. I was
mm,
microdosing psilocybin. I was experimenting with other stuff, and I just cold turkey walked away from everything. Caffeine, like literally everything I walked away from. And in the wake of that, in trying to use cannabis in any variety, inhaled or oral, it's like the vibration of that medicine like hyper focuses my consciousness on that thought, and I haven't been able
mm,
to escape it.
mm, mm.
Have you ever seen that happen before?
Yes. So I've supported people after medicine journeys that I didn't help them prep for or facilitate them for. That the where the spiritual emergence becomes an emergency,
Mm.
right? It's like we're opening, and at some point the mind or the nervous system, right? Too much, too soon, too fast is the
You
definition
just
of
described,
trauma.
yes, you just described the entire approach that I had to my spiritual awakening. Go on.
Right. And so, right, we in this work we talk about pacing. Like, what's the pacing? And we don't do medicine again until we've fully integrated from the last experience. What does that mean? When are you ready? When are you fully integrated? Well, you will know that. Working with a, practitioner can help with that. But like giving yourself the time and space in between, because the reason we do medicine is to bring it into our life. And yes, we have these amazing awakenings, and yes, this is the truth. And we're both the drop and the ocean at the same time. That's the paradox of it. We find ourselves in this default world. We wake up in this same body, in this consecutive day from the last one somehow, on this linear timeline experience that we're all somehow waking up into every day, around the world continually, right? Like how does reality work? And as you start to pull back the layers and you start to see these things, they're again like that whole experience of too much, too soon, too fast. How do we actually take on one of the things I love that Daniel McQueen says from Medicinal Mindfulness: the slower we go, the faster we go,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Slow is
like,
smooth, smooth is fast.
yeah, exactly. Um, I am one with the force, and the force is with me, right? It's like the both and the both, and it's the process of the merging and the individuating,
Mm.
right? If my reality of how I kind of put my reality together is from an experience from 5-MeO DMT, where my mentor facilitated for me, this beautiful woman, who's now a best friend of mine, who actually held a safe space with tons of space after for me to integrate back into my body and move when I needed to, and be able to identify what's the first thought that came back into my mind once I came back into my body, because often that's like the hum of the refrigerator in the background that you just don't notice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if you can like identify, there it is. Oh, interesting, curious, right? And like work with someone who's skilled at, um, being with these things that are slowly reintegrating back, that what I experienced in my reintegration process was, I don't remember if it was open-eyed or closed-eyed, but being on my back and looking up and seeing like the mandala of the universe above me, made of golden light. It is all about my gold in my my branding and my world, the light, right? The light, the vibration. And that in that moment I remembered, right? I didn't realize I remembered that I am a spark of that light embodied in this human suit, which is a sensory soft technology built to experience, built to feel, because so often we decide not to because it's too much to feel, too much too soon, too fast, right? Built to feel in order to inform self and collective consciousness through the experience of other. And what a fucking opportunity, for one. And whoa, what am I going to do with this opportunity? You know, now that like I've had this experience, right? Somebody can tell you about that, but until you experience that, it was a whole, it changed my life. It changed my paradigm, you know, my approach. I could feel my spark, right? I remembered my spark. I was shown my spark descending into my body, you know, and this gave me hope. I know some people who have gone and experienced this all, and when they come back in their body, they're like, send me back. Being in my body is too much. I want to go back, right? And this longing.
Yeah, that's a dangerous place to be.
Right, the longing. And so some people are chasing the dragon, right? They're like addicted to healing, or they're addicted to these experiences, because we actually need our egos. Our egos are our interface with this strange default reality that we find ourselves waking up into every day. And we actually need not a rigid ego, but a resilient ego. Just like I was talking about that muscle that's available in full release and full engagement, our ego needs to be that way too, right? And so our ego is here for us to, again, it's the interface, like this Riverside that you and I are talking through here today for this podcast. It's the way that we interact with our reality and our body and our senses and the input. And when we try to kill it or obliterate it, it will always come back. Our ego will always be here. But what the spiritual masters teach us is that the ego is a better servant than a master. And so what happens is that when our ego is rigid and in control, the monkey mind, right? Our iterations, our ideations, even the fear, right? That is like an overreaction of. And how do we befriend our ego? Because if it's a part of us and we're trying to kill it, can you imagine like how dysregulating that would be for an ego? And how might the ego
confirm.
Yeah, and how might the ego start to fight back in some way, right? Whether it's rigidity or not, sometimes it comes up as fear, existential dread, right? These sorts of things. Because really, when we're doing medicine, we're practicing death. We're practicing the full surrender. We're practicing the release. We're practicing the merging back from where we came and back from where we're going. And so if we befriend the ego and actually strengthen our relationship with it, and let it be the guy who's in the crow's nest looking out for us, right? Who's given a job, but also not necessarily at the helm, right? We want ourself with a capital S at the helm, right? But our internal family system, shall we say, which I'm not trained in, but I have like ideas of, and we've had a little bit of that through Hakomi, is an entire ship, right? We have to do all of the internal systems are working in collaboration with each other. It's like an internal community. And I've lived in one version of intentional community or another for the last decade. And let me tell you, when there's like someone at the head who is just deciding for everybody, the rest of the community is like, but what about me? Right? And so, like, however each individual's insides are oriented, do the work around getting curious about what those parts are, right? The part that is terrified, right? The part that has a fear of death, the part that the panic comes from. And with cannabis, I love it because with most classical psychedelics, I like to say you're more of like a leaf on a river and you just kind of go where it takes you. But with cannabis, you're on the same river, but you're in a boat with your life vest and your oar and your helmet, and you're like navigating, right? You have choice, you have agency, and that actually helps to heal trauma, because trauma is formed when we don't have choice and agency, right? Like we're subjected to this too much, too soon, too fast. We can't navigate it. We can't process it. We can't choose in that moment. So I love cannabis because I've come from all sides, like, smoke and watch Netflix. Like, I still do that. But I've come from these times when I would smoke and I would start to hear, like, gosh, like, what are you doing with your life? Who are you? How are you treating your partner? Are you even happy with yourself? Are you happy with your partner? Like, all these stories start to come up. What are you eating? Right? Like, all of this self-doubt that would come up. So when people say, oh, cannabis isn't my medicine, I'm like, what is your experience with it?
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, knowing now that there's ways to navigate that we call cannabis the mother medicine, as opposed to ayahuasca as like the grandmother.
Ah.
So the mother medicine, it's female. We imbibe the nectar of her flower to alter our consciousness. How much more feminine or sexy does it get, right? And so when we work with this mother medicine, we are working with nurturance. We're working at reparenting, right? But we're also working with, did you clean your room? Have you done your homework? Like, all of those parts of the mother comes out. I don't know if everybody has those experiences, but I did. And that the opportunity, what those ruminations or experiences are. Like, if I were working with you in that experience, I would ask, like, what is the experience? Feel your breath, feel your body, slow your breath down, right? Like, you're safe here, right? That there is information in the fear or in the terror or in the self-doubt or in the rumination that is actually pointing at something for
Yeah.
us to look at.
There's something that was created very, very long ago. Let's assume this lifetime, where it feels like there's a need for significance, meaning that the idea that this will just end at some point and it's just a wash in the mix of infinity. That's the terrifying part.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, because otherwise, why would being infinite be terrifying? It's like that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
To
Mm-hmm.
have infinite experiences, and we're all
Mm-hmm.
part of beautiful
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, and blah blah blah. Like it
Mm-hmm.
should, and when you feel it, when you experience it in its purest form, it's nothing but pure bliss.
Mm-hmm.
But this like egoic, like, fracture where it's like this clinging to, and it's not even necessarily my identity. It's like everything about the experience, gravity, the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? The things that make up this specific trip around the sun, which, if you get far enough out there, you realize, like, we are but 3 dimensions plus time, and there's probably infinite dimensions and infinite permutations of those dimensions, and like
Mm-hmm.
even just the electromagnetic spectrum, we see this much. What would it be like
Mm-hmm.
to experience the whole thing? And so like the
Yeah,
idea,
light, sound, all of it,
all of
right?
it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
vibrations, how many different forms do they come in? And
And what if it all exists here right now at the same time? We
everything,
just can't
everywhere, all
perceive
at
it.
once.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Fantastic film, by the way.
I haven't seen it.
Well,
I feel like I can predict the premise just on
it's
the
important. Yeah,
yeah.
it's important.
Uh, it's but at the same time, consciously, like cognitively, I acknowledge there is no escape. There never has been. This just is what it is. Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter how much I want it to not be true or be different. It just
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah,
And so,
this is happening. It's just
right.
what's so, right?
And it's
And so, how do we navigate that?
right. Exactly.
How do
That's
we
the part
navigate
that
that?
has been a very interesting
Mm-hmm.
journey, is like to expose myself close enough to the edge that I can explore the source of the discomfort
Mm-hmm.
without blowing open a panic attack. Because a panic attack is unhelpful, in my opinion.
Yeah, because
Too
it
much
sets
too
this.
fast,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Oh,
exactly.
I wrote
Over
that.
the edge.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah. It's and we're here to feel, right?
Bill
And
wrote that down. There's a lot of
built.
great.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Built to feel. We are sensory beings. Um, I like to distinguish between an emotion and a feeling. Like an emotion is like an internal sense, and it's made up of a chemical cocktail
Mhm.
inside of your body, and a feeling is a feel. Like, what do you feel in the body because of that chemical cocktail, because of that emotion? Right. So as a somatic practitioner, I like to distinguish between the two. And so with, to be alive is to be traumatized, and to live is to have more trauma. And in order for us to continue on, we have to cope. And to me, this work and the work that I work with my clients on is building healthy coping strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the only ones that we might know is like, well, I don't know how to breathe or do yoga, or tune into my womb to be able to identify my truth. Like whatever these tools are, that we can learn, that we can teach. Some people, the only thing they saw is like, well, I need to drink, right? And that's what they're doing, right? That's why there's a dependence on a substance or a person, right? The codependence, the person is there as the coping mechanism. And that what we do, the work between the works, is to identify, oh, this is like super edgy for me here. Because the further out we go in our work, right? You were talking about like touching the edge and touching the edge of infinity over here.
Piercing the veil.
Yeah, the further out we go, the deeper our roots need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about resourcing. So resourcing is coping mechanisms, it's sleep, it's self-care. It's why I identify as a psychedelic self-care specialist, because what are we doing
Eating
to,
trash, sleeping 4 hours a night,
yeah,
slamming energy drinks. You are not ready to go on this kind of journey.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so how do we look at every part of our lives, every relationship, every breath, every choice, every particle of food, every piece of media we consume, and we start to curate our experience instead of having it curated for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that choice is a superpower. It's like the superpower that makes us human. And so how do we empower choice to begin to curate our experience of life? And if I don't know how to do something, I get to choose to learn,
Mm.
right? Or I get to choose to forget. or I choose to dissociate or ignore, even not to choose is a choice.
It's really interesting, the attraction of ignorance once you've kind of kicked off the journey, and how uncomfortable it can be at times.
Mhm.
There's definitely been multiple points where I've been like, I just wish I could go. As painful as it was to be highly traumatized and just constantly re-traumatizing myself, it was almost simpler. In fact, it certainly was simpler, because it was just,
Mhm.
there was no choice. It was just all stimulus and response, right?
That's all you know.
That's all you know. And it's just
That's
like
all
a
you know.
game of like, what's the word I'm looking for? The arcade game with the flappers.
Pinball.
Pinball. Thank you. I was going to say ping pong. I'm like, that's not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for folks who are not yet on the path, or maybe they're at the beginning of the path, they're path curious. What would you,
Conscious curious.
that's right, conscious curious. Where would you recommend people go to find a way to grow their roots and
Mhm.
learn about what growing your branches looks like, so that you don't burn them on the sun?
Right. Yeah. The Icarus. Right. It's like and it's a perfect analogy. The taller the tree, the deeper the roots. Um, and then our life is the trunk. Right. Like our current experience. Um, and and to me, the rooting is the work.
How do
And
you go
then,
about that work? Is there a,
yeah,
a specific book they should read? Is there a website they should
all
go?
of them,
Oh,
all of them. So to me, it's like what is it? Follow your bliss, right? Joseph Campbell. Follow your bliss. What brings you joy? What are you interested in geeking out on? Go pull on that thread and see what unravels. For me, the somatic side was important because I grew up, extremely dissociated, and so being in my body was terrifying. And yet I followed all of these embodied modalities. I grew up as a dancer because I was pigeon-toed when I was a child. So I started ballet because my mom said, "You want ballet or leg braces?" And so like learning, like the process of like retraining my body, understanding that it's going to the gym, but it's the mental gym, it's the physical gym, it's the emotional gym. um, Being able to look at your life as not something that's happening to you, but something that's happening for you, and it's pointing at things for you to acknowledge, right? As soon as you acknowledge it, you're able to respond. that's that's when it's that's when you're responsible for it, right?
mm-hmm.
When you don't know, you live in this ignorance, um, because we're dissociated, we don't understand. That's where privilege and entitlement and colonization and detachment, all of these things that we're finally starting, at least for me, I'm starting to understand. My whiteness, my privilege, how that comes in and affects my world, like decolonizing my mind, um and and the and then how to use the privilege that I have to be able to, bring voice and and words to those experiences. um but that, like, all of these different parts, like whatever, I say follow your fuck yeah. Like whatever that is where you go. So if that is medicine work, then okay. If you want to do medicine work, all right, you wanna fly a helicopter. You just gonna go and find a helicopter and then fly it, or are you gonna do some research and maybe take a class and learn a little bit? Maybe even have a guide there take you up in the helicopter. You get to
That's
see the top of the mountain, right? And then when you come down, it's like, okay, you get baby steps into it. I'm not going to learn how to take off or land at first. I'm going to be up there and somebody's going to be like, here, this is how you navigate flying. Look, oh, I can turn, these things, there's like baby steps to it. So, you're not going to be, it's not the Matrix. You don't just go and get like Apache helicopter software downloaded into your, that'd be cool, but like, ew. Look at the world that required that.
That's how microdosing felt, by the way. I
Mm,
microdosed with 0.25 grams every day for a year.
mm,
And I didn't realize you're supposed to cycle on and off, and I didn't
mhm,
realize that 0.25 grams is way too damn much to have on
mhm,
a regular. But it felt like I was plugged into the Matrix. Like the amount I was able to learn
mhm.
and the amount of intuition I had felt literally superhuman.
Yeah,
It's so compelling. You've got to really be careful about that.
yeah, yeah. And so as you hear these stories, it's like if somebody heard you say that and be like, oh, so what is the proper dose? What is the right protocol for that? Go and look it up.
Right.
There are infinite
Reddit is
resources.
incredible.
Reddit is amazing. Arrowhead will tell you all the things you need to know. Find a teacher that you love. For me, like I met this whole community of people that we were talking about that were modeling a way of being. And I was like, can I hang out with you? Can I learn from you? Oh, you're a frame drum teacher? I would like to learn frame drum.
You're unlikely to find that in Fargo, North Dakota. I'm making up a place, right?
Yeah,
It's the opposite of Southern
but
California.
that's what the internet's for.
True. So is there a
That's how you found
directory
me.
that you know? Touche. Touche.
Touche.
Is there a directory of integration specialists? Like, is there a place people could go? Like, let's say they're looking specifically for someone to help them, either whether it's a circle or a one-on-one. Like, is there a place that people can go to look?
There are a myriad of places actually, and I would love to
We
see
can
if
put that in
there's
the show notes.
any the myriad, the actual links.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Aware Project is one of the places that I'm listed. Let's see, Third Wave has a whole listing of practitioners. I'm in the process of getting listed there. Psychedelics Today, is that what it is? Psychedelic Support has a whole listing. Maps at least used to have a whole listing. I don't know if they're doing that anymore, of practitioners. Um, and then there are places you can learn about these things too. Each individual school probably has a listing. Like medicinal mindfulness is in the process of credentialing. Once you're credentialed, you can be listed by region, so people can find people to work with in person, or we are doing therapeutic psychedelic work online. With cannabis, I wouldn't recommend that with any other medicines, but with cannabis, it's safe and strangely works. And we only discovered that because of COVID.
Ah,
We weren't
silver
doing that
lining in
before.
every.
Yeah. Yeah. Daniel calls it his forced evolution, COVID. Um,
So the net
yeah.
is it looks really beautiful to fly over Mount Haleakala in Hawaii,
Mm.
but don't just go jump in the helicopter and try and figure out how to fly it.
Right. Right. So that's the work, right? And then I also love this whole like mountain helicopter analogy for medicine work. When we take medicine, we're getting in the helicopter, we're flying to the top of the mountain, and we get to see the top. We get to see the sights. But when we're done, the helicopter sets us back off at the bottom of the mountain. And the work between the works, the integration, the preparation, the lifing that happens in between is this process of you climbing that mountain every step of the way, right? And there are many paths, one mountain. So whether that's psychedelics or tantra or Buddhism or Sufi spinning meditation, follow that, like whatever that is, because whatever your fuck yeah is the thing that your soul is just like opening to, right? So if you're opening to it, follow that. And that's that part that allows for more inspiration, allows you to be in flow because you're following, you're tugging on the thread, right? And you're getting curious, and it's something that inspires you, something that you want to geek out on. And that's what finding psychedelics and integration work and facilitation was for me. I came in because I liked the people, and there was a way of being, and I just like, who are these people and this way of being, and this feeling that I got, and this seeking, this yearning that I had my whole life, knowing there had to be something more than just what it was I could see or experience in my um, um, homeostasis, in that current homeostasis, that way of being, that way of seeing the world. And so, finding those people, finding those teachers, whether it's just listening to podcasts like yours, or taking someone's class, or watching their YouTubes, or going out and paying professionals for their professional services so that they can be supported too, right? Like every coach has a coach. I have a coach. I have
Right.
a therapist, right? Like I'm out learning and doing
I have
my
a
work.
traditional therapist and a spiritual therapist.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, different practitioners that I sit with according to what I'm looking for, different medicines that I sit with. I live in community. There's 14 of us.
Oh,
That's a continual ceremony, a continual process of refinement and
tried for like a
self-reflection.
decade to get my friends to start a commune with me, and I got rebuffed. I still feel like it would be an amazing idea, but I've just
Mhm.
given the like amount of effort. It's too big a hill to climb.
Yeah, it's a big lift for sure, for sure. I've never founded a community, but um, other than my own, my work, the community that I have through my work. But yeah, and I feel like also we're taught by our culture and our domestication that we're supposed to do it on our own,
Mm-hmm.
and if we can't, there must be something wrong with
Try
us,
to be effective. Yeah.
right? We're defective in some way.
Pull up those bootstraps.
So yeah, buy this thing, get this house, get this car, everybody needs a need, right? Like Dr. Seuss, everybody needs one of those. And so we spend our money on things that we don't need, and yet we refuse to pay medicine practitioners, or we ask for favors from facilitators or integration specialists. Can I just consult with you for half an hour? It's like this is our wisdom. We're wisdom keepers, and how
Hard-won wisdom, by the way.
hard won. You've been walking up that mountain for a while, right? Come along. I'll tell you stories as we go, but you got to walk that path, and you got to carry your own pack,
Right.
and we can rest as many times as we need to. Right? I got you. But this is your path to walk, and I'm not going to drag anybody, and I'm not going to tell you it's easy, and
It is beautiful.
and we will lose people along the way,
And it's
and it's totally worth it, and we get beautiful views from each of the elevations that we find, and at some point we might get overheated or overly exhausted, and it's okay to rest. It's okay to ask for help. And what the missing piece that I feel is in our culture in general is community. We do this together. We are tribal beings. We evolved together. We didn't each have our own little cave.
right.
You know, um, they're finding these massive cave systems where 100,000 people like lived in these caves as cavemen. You're like, what? The togetherness, and COVID has taught us that, right? The need for togetherness. So find a community, find the others, find your people. Go on Meetup and go to a psychedelic meetup. Just type in psychedelic in meetup.com and see what pops up, right? And also assess along the way. Don't go to an ayahuasca ceremony that is advertised on Meetup. Like, that is just a disaster waiting to happen. Sloppy containers, out of integrity, breaking the law, right? Like, overtly breaking the law. So find the people, find the community, and through the community, you can start to ask questions. You could find practitioners. You could sit in a ceremony. You can ask questions. You can have experiences normalized for you. That might look like a local psychedelic community, like Aware Project, which is the Southern California Psychedelic Society, or any city. You can just Google, like, what is Austin's Psychedelic Society, and you'll find it. And they'll often have talks and meetings and guest speakers, building community around the medicine. And then, that is the work that I'm most passionate about these days too, is like, what does the work between the works look like? How do we utilize medicine as a tool in a larger experience of, like, the arc of experience of life, and creating community around supporting people along their medicine path towards self-leadership and self-actualization. And I am specifically doing that with female identified people these days, in a beautiful program that I run, creating community, witnessing and being witnessed, right? The vulnerability of being witnessed in our vulnerability.
It's powerful when it happens.
Yeah. And so healing, and also to witness other people in their vulnerability and be like, whoa, there's something that they're going through that resonates for me, and I am healing simply by witnessing somebody else healing.
Such a gift.
Right? The sympathetic resonance, right? The harmonics, the attuned nervous systems that are all vibrating and elevating and evolving together. And that's why containers are important.
This has been an absolutely remarkable conversation. My intuition was correct. You are an amazing woman. This is a truly important, critical space, and you are a pioneer in it. So thank you for being that Sherpa and walking people up the mountain and sharing your time with us. And for those who are able to listen and get courage or ideas or whatever someone might get out of this, if nothing else, I got a whole lot out of it.
I'm so glad.
Bless you.
Glad. Yeah.
Hopefully we can do a part 2 in the future. I'd love to spend time just talking about community because there's so much there.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. The rupture and repair process, that's like a whole other podcast. Yeah, there's so much there, right? And like, healing is possible, and we're all a part of a system that is informing each other, right? These beautiful mirrors that we see around us. And so my prayer, as I walk, is like, may I be a clear mirror.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for mirroring on this fine day, and look forward to seeing where life takes you.
Sure.
Stay blessed.
So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.